What's going on? It's Tori. Welcome to Trade Talk Tuesday. Now, before we talk about the one player I think the Portland Trailblazers need to make a hard push for at the trade deadline this year, let's talk some of our trade deadline coverage. We're going to be dropping a video every day, or at least I'm going to try. Every day between now and the trade deadline. The trade deadline is in about 2.5 weeks, so that'll be a lot of trade deadline preview content. I know you guys love talking trades, so I'm going to have you hooked up with some trade videos as well as our post-game streams and all that sort of stuff. All that will culminate in our third annual trade deadline stream that'll go live trade deadline morning. We'll cover every trade. We'll talk about every deal that goes down. We will have a Blazers-centric focus, but we will focus on the entire NBA. We'll explain the ins and outs of every trade as we normally do. Me and Derek are CBA nerds, so we know what goes into trades and what makes them work and what different teams are looking for. So we're going to bring that perspective to the videos coming up and then to that trade deadline stream. So hopefully we're able to catch you trade deadline morning, as we will have probably a 5 or 6 hour live stream for you guys covering everything that goes down. So if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button below. And with that being said, here's the one player that the Blazers need to go after in this year's NBA trade deadline. Now, this guy might be a surprise to some. To others who have watched a lot of our recent streams, this isn't going to be a surprise at all. But this is a guy who's kind of flown under the radar a little bit in terms of potential acquisitions for the Portland Trailblazers. And he's a guy that I think would be a perfect fit here. He's young, and he could hopefully grow into that Draymond Green role. Blazer fans are enamored with Draymond Green, but Draymond Green isn't gettable, and players with that defensive capability are hard to get because they are pretty rare. You have a lot more really good offensive players than really good defensive players in the NBA, in my opinion. You look at a Marcus Smart in Boston, I know he's available, but he's kind of been their heart and soul. Draymond Green's been the heart and soul in Golden State. It's harder to acquire those guys because they are the heart and soul of their team. I mean, just look back at Wesley Matthews back in 2013, 2014 for the Portland Trailblazers. He was their heart and soul, and then they lost him and completely fell apart the year that they traded for Aaron Aflalo. So it's hard to get guys like that are already established, but there is a guy who is trending towards being that caliber of defensive player, and he might have already been that caliber of defensive player, but he's not so entrenched in his team yet that I think maybe he could be gettable. Now, he might be deemed untouchable by this team, but I think this team makes the most sense for a trade partner for Portland. So that name that I'm talking about is Herbert Jones. He plays for the New Orleans Pelicans. He was the 35th pick in the NBA draft last season. Coincidentally enough, Draymond Green back in 2012 was also the 35th overall pick. Now, I'm going to talk about why I like Herb Jones so much, and then I'm going to talk about why the New Orleans Pelicans are actually the most likely team to make a trade with the Portland Trailblazers this season. So Herb Jones, coming out of the University of Alabama, slipped in the draft because he wasn't known as that good of a shooter. He had a little bit of a hitch in his jump shot. He's fixed that this year. He's shooting 38.4% from three. He was also looked at as a phenomenal defender. And honestly, this year, he has a chance to make second team all defense in the NBA. He's been that good defensively, and he's just a rookie. He stands 6'8", has a standing reach of about 8'10". He has a 7-foot wingspan, and he's a guy that can guard 4, maybe even 5 positions in the NBA if he's going up against a smaller center. He is a phenomenal on-ball defender. He's a smart team defender. He's an all-around really, really good defensive player. And Blazer fans have been enamored with Ben Simmons for that reason. The problem is Ben Simmons is pretty much ungettable because Daryl Morey wants the moon and back for him. It sounds like Ben Simmons might turn into a sign-and-trade piece with James Harden in Brooklyn, so it sounds like Daryl Morey is actually going to not trade Ben Simmons at this trade deadline in this season. They're just not even going to go for it despite Joel Embiid playing so great. But if Ben Simmons was truly truly available for Portland, it would take CJ McCollum and 3 first-round picks, maybe another young player like a Nasir Little thrown in. It would cost a lot. Now, Ben Simmons in Portland, he wouldn't be the primary creator, and the Blazers wouldn't really need his playmaking if they kept Yusuf Nurkic, if they had Damian Lillard and Anthony Simons. They have a lot of passing ability in those 3 alone that, Ben Simmons' creation would be nice, but you need a guy to play off of Dame and Simons and Nurkic a little bit better than Simmons, instead of a guy who kind of needs the ball in his hands to be able to be competitive. On the defensive end, Ben Simmons is what the Blazers need, but I also think Herb Jones can do a lot of the defensive things that Ben Simmons can. I'm not saying he's as good of a defensive player as Ben Simmons, but he's closer than you would think. And when you look at the potential acquisition cost for the Portland Trailblazers to get Herb Jones compared to Ben Simmons, it makes a ton of sense. Now, I talked about how Ben Simmons' passing ability and creation ability wouldn't be needed so much in Portland, but it would still be useful to have a guy that can pass the ball, short roll, and play make, attack the rim, handle the ball a little bit. And for Herb Jones, he's actually one of those guys that can do that. He averaged over 3 assists per game his final year in college. He's currently averaging around 2 assists per game for the New Orleans Pelicans, but he's not being tasked with much creation. This is a guy that can handle the ball. He can play make out of the short roll. He can be a secondary creator to guys like Dame and Simons. So if this player is starting to sound maybe a little bit like a young Draymond Green, that's kind of the vibe that he gives off to me. The defensive ability, I think Herbert Jones is a better three-point shooter than Draymond Green, and he has some untapped playmaking potential. Right now, Herb Jones' stats: 9 points per game, almost 4 rebounds per game, about 2 assists per game, 50% from the field, 38.4% from 3, 80% from the free throw line. So he's efficient, and he checks off every box that the Portland Trailblazers should be looking for. He would help their defense monumentally, and the cost to get him would be far less than Ben Simmons. And I think he could be 80% of what Ben Simmons would be for the Portland Trailblazers. Now, that's crazy to some people. I'm already seeing the comments in the comment section below like,
you gotta be kidding me?
But, some guys just see Ben Simmons as a superstar or an all-star, a big name guy, and then they might not even know who Herbert Jones is. He just got drafted in the 2nd round. He's a rookie. But that's the point I made at the beginning of the video. The Blazers don't really have the means to go out and get Ben Simmons right now, but Herbert Jones is a completely different story, and he has a lot of upside in front of him. That's the type of guys that the Blazers need to get before they cost too much, like a Ben Simmons, and then hope that they can grow into a role that helps them raise the team's ceiling to contention level. Now, why are the New Orleans Pelicans the most likely team to make a trade with the Portland Trailblazers this year? Well, the Pelicans supposedly are gunning for the play-in, and they need a lead guard. They need some guard help. This is a New Orleans Pelicans team that was so desperate for guard help, they gave up a first-round pick last offseason just so they could get Devontae Graham. Devontae Graham. That's not good. Now, New Orleans is likely because I could see them going after both CJ McCollum and Norman Powell. They have a $17 million traded player exception, which could fit Norman Powell's contract into it, meaning that the Pelicans wouldn't even have to trade anything to match Norman Powell's salary. Herb Jones is only making $1.7 million a year, so they could trade Herb Jones straight up for Norman Powell. I don't think they do that. I think they'd be more interested in CJ McCollum, but at this point, I would be ecstatic if the Blazers could find a way to flip Norman Powell into Herb Jones. In that trade, the Blazers would also get back a $15.5 million traded player exception that they could use somewhere else as an asset. So Norman Powell straight up for Herb Jones works really well. But I have a 3-team trade here that makes some sense to me, and I'm going to explain why, and it involves CJ McCollum. Now, the Pelicans are reportedly very interested in CJ McCollum. They need a good lead guard to put next to Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson, and supposedly they think CJ McCollum can be that guy. So here is the trade I came up with. I'm just going to explain the Bulls side of this because this is kind of my favorite trade outside of potential Pelicans deals. Robert Covington going to the Bulls, and then they match his salary by trading out Derrick Jones Jr. The problem is the Blazers can't reacquire Derrick Jones Jr. because they traded him in the past year, so he has to be sent to a third team. The Bulls trade Portland their first round pick back in 2022 in order to get Robert Covington. That opens up all of Portland's future first round picks because the 2022 pick that they currently owe Chicago is protected through 2028, locking up some of those future resources. Now, in this trade, the Pelicans essentially give up Josh Hart and Herb Jones for CJ McCollum. Thomas Satoransky has had a really bad season. He's just a salary matching piece that is expiring. And this trade works for the Pelicans because every player they're trading out matches CJ McCollum's salary, and then that $17 million traded player exception they have that I just talked about can absorb both Derrick Jones Jr. and Troy Brown Jr. And on Portland's side of things, Josh Hart, I think, would be a really good third guard behind Damian Lillard and Anthony Simons going forward. Herb Jones fixes a lot of issues, and then they get their first round pick back. They also save $20 million in this deal. They also get a $20.8 million traded player exception that they could use to absorb salary in the offseason, and as I said, they have all their future first. So going forward after this, I think the Blazers would need to trade Norman Powell. They have their three-guard rotation with Dame, Simons, and Josh Hart. Herb Jones you could slot in as the future starting small forward or the future starting power forward. At that point, the Blazers would then just need to fill the other forward spot. But considering they have all their future picks after this trade, almost a $21 million traded player exception, and Norman Powell to include in deals, Portland would be able to probably get a pretty good starting forward back in a trade, whether or not it's at the deadline or if it comes in the offseason. Now, Portland might be in a position where they could extract more value out of New Orleans in this deal. It just depends on how badly New Orleans wants CJ McCollum, but I wanted to make this trade really good for both the Pelicans and the Bulls. If it's not good enough for the Bulls, then maybe the Pelicans could trade a second round pick to Chicago. Anyway, let me know what you think about Herb Jones down in the comment section below. Definitely go watch some of his footage, especially on the defensive end, because this is a guy I've fallen in love with. I was high on him in the past draft, as I'll show you right now.
35th pick in the 2021 NBA draft, the New Orleans Pelicans select Herbert Jones from the University of Alabama.
Solid pick. Solid pick. They took two of my favorite guys in this draft. I just like Herbert Jones, man. He averaged 6.5 rebounds per game in 27 minutes. I'd say that's pretty solid. He also shot 35% from three last year. He was only on 1.7 attempts per game, but he did shoot 35% from three last year. He's a phenomenal defensive player, athletic, with playmaking potential, averaged over 3 assists per game. So in terms of just an athlete, defender, playmaker at the 3 or 4 spot, I love it. His stand reach is 8'10", which is about normal for a power forward in today's NBA. So I think he has the size to play power forward. If he can shoot the ball, I think he's going to be possibly a top 20 player in this draft. Like, if he can shoot the ball at a decent enough clip, and I don't think his jumper's completely broken, like, if he's a serviceable shooter, good defensive player, good playmaker, good slasher and finisher, athlete, that's a really good player. It's just dependent on his three-point shot. If he can't shoot, I think he can still be serviceable as a defensive athlete, like, I don't know, like a Derrick Jones Jr. with some playmaking and a little bit less athletic, like that type of player I could see him being. But, like, if he can shoot, then I think he's going to be a really good player. So that's why I liked him. That's why I wanted him for Portland, because it's hard to find a guy that's able to play make like that and is athletic and defensively versatile as he is. He can guard multiple positions. So I like Herb Jones because he's a Jones and because I think he's pretty underrated. So I like New Orleans picking him there at 35 and then Trey Murphy at 17. I like what New Orleans is doing so far this offseason.
So yeah, this is a guy that I really, really like. Phenomenal defender with a lot of untapped offensive upside as a shot creator and passer and playmaker, in my opinion. And even if he doesn't realize that, he's been shooting the 3-ball well, doesn't make dumb plays, plays within the flow of an offense, and would fit in perfectly here in Portland. With that, that's a wrap for this video. Hope you enjoyed. Until next time, as always, peace out. Go Blazers.